Support for the CivicSciTV network comes from listeners and viewers like you, and organizations such as the New York City Economic Development Corporation, which works to create a vibrant, inclusive, and globally competitive economy for all New Yorkers. Visit the nonprofit's website at edc.nyc to learn more. Making sense of the latest developments across the civic science landscape by dissecting new insights from civic scientists and practitioners in academia, government, for-profit, and nonprofit organizations. This is Questions of the Day with Fanuel Muindi.
Jeanne Garbarino, welcome to Questions of the Day. I'm so excited to have you on my program.
Thanks for having me, Fanuel. I'm excited to be here.
So I wanted to get this question out of the way first. Is it true that you were once rescued by the fire department in New York after getting your head stuck in a fence? Okay, is this true?
It is true. It happened at the Oval Park in Norwood, which is near Montefiore Hospital. And these big kids were like somehow not using the proper entrance of the sprinkler system, it was in New York City public parks, and it had these like iron fence around it. So I was like, they must be crawling through it. So I sort of wanted to do what the big kids did, put my head in, and that was that. So I was with my preschool, and one greasy head later, after being buttered up a bit to see if I can slip out, it didn't work. There was a little hacksaw action going on next to my head. And my dad then took me out for some ice cream. So it was all good. And I became a little bit of a legend in the park.
Wow. Did it make the news? That's my question.
Honestly, it was like 1983. Maybe, but I'm not sure. Yeah.
Way back when. Now things have changed since then. You are now the executive director of RockEDU at the Rockefeller University. And
Yes.
This is a powerhouse of a program in New York, and really focusing on creating systemic change, connecting scientific and non-scientific communities to engage in the wonder of science. And you use that word very intentionally, wonder of science, as a justice-centered process that is integral to our humanity. There's a lot in there, Jeanne. In your own words, what does RockEDU do?
Well, basically, we work with the variety of different kinds of audiences that love science, whether that is a scientist who is, investigating something that no one else has ever seen before. Or maybe it is an administrator at Rockefeller who, has a volunteer role at a school. Or maybe it's a student who likes to tinker, likes to use their hand, but they've never really found a space where they can explore that. And so what we try to do is just create multiple kinds of pathways where people can both mentor and be mentored. So it's just an ecosystem, and we try to identify places where the ecosystem is growing really well, and we add as many nutrients and as possible for that ecosystem to thrive. And then we find the areas that maybe aren't doing so well, and figuring out what is causing the issues in this space, and can we do anything to fix it? And if we can, what does that look like? And so those are, I guess, that is not a less verbose way of putting what we try to do, but hopefully that paints a picture for you.
Yeah, and you talk about ecosystems, right? You have a diversity of projects, and in fact, these are probably active now. You've had others that have gone by before, right? Just to list a few: Lab Jumpstart. You have Talking Science, the Summer Neuroscience Program (SNP), the Summer Science Research Program (SSRP). Jeanne, what is that theory of change, right? As you're designing these programs.
Well, so the idea here is that I think 101 engagement, meet people where they are, right? And science doesn't have to look like any one thing. And so what we try to do is survey the sort of how do people want to be involved in this, and then we compare it to the capacity that we have at Rockefeller to say, like, can we, is this something that we can meet? So for example, in Talking Science, this is where we have high schools from anywhere in the tri-state area. Anybody who can commute in is welcome to commute in and be a part of this. We can take about 450 people, students and teachers together, and it's a free event. It's first come, first served. And essentially, we spend the day engaging with a variety of different kinds of scientific information from the scientists' perspectives. Or, for example, we have students who really like to tinker and build, and they're interested in behavior, but maybe they don't have like full summers to, dedicate to research. And so we have a 2-week program that helps to sort of bring together the scientists who really want to be a part of a mentorship ecosystem, but don't necessarily have like oodles of time to do so, and matching that with another time matched interest group to have like a 2-week session. And it's really nice. So what we do is we survey our audiences, and we create and pull back based on what the desires seem to be in the moment. And then we're not afraid to start a new program, or even stop a program or pause a program, because we want to be as agile as possible.
Yeah. So in the past, you have stopped programs.
Oh yeah. Yeah. We've shifted all sorts of things. We actually change our mission. Every 2 years or so, we hold a retreat amongst our team to compare, our values and our goals and sort of the temperature of our university. We have to, of course, work within the boundaries that we are inside of in our institution. But I really like the way Adrienne Marie Brown puts it, and it's like, be like water. You don't know what that landscape is always going to look like, but we're going to do our best to navigate that as effectively and efficiently as possible.
Yeah, because essentially, I mean, you're still part of the Rockefeller University.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah. Operating almost like a nonprofit, but not really. Tell us about that dynamic a little bit.
Sure. So Rockefeller's a really unique place. It's actually it's one of 2 places I've ever worked at. And I love working here, obviously, or else I maybe would have gone elsewhere. But we don't have departments at Rockefeller. And so the scientific talent is, people come and open labs in Rockefeller based on either they have like an incredible skill set that maybe doesn't exist at Rockefeller yet. And you can see what happened when we invested in cryo-EM, for example, how that blew up our sort of structural biology space. We might survey and say, well, what is missing? And then go recruit someone, but we're not doing so based on XYZ kind of parameters on like a biology department or a chemistry department, right? So it's really just like, how can we invest in the profile of research that ultimately, serves the benefit of humanity, which is Rockefeller's motto. And the role that I think RockEDU has come to play is, when we say science for the benefit of humanity, like, are we actually saying all humanity, right? And so we try to really be, and we do so at a small scale and in collaboration with so many others. It is it's a cultural shift at Rockefeller. People are looking for ways to identify their own biases, our own blind spots. And we're sort of in this together to say, hey, I think, XYZ is happening. I think we should address this. And as long as you're bringing it up and we can engage in dialogue, there's always that sort of space to make change. And I really value that.
Yeah. And so you mentioned the word people. I'm assuming in this case, scientists, right? Because these are part of your stakeholder, that 2-part thing you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
So what have they been telling you throughout these years of running RockEDU?
Yeah. Okay. So we do a lot of surveys. We do a lot of interviews, a lot of informal discussions. And what we basically learn is that a lot of scientists really want to mentor. A lot of PIs, graduate students, RAs, a lot of scientists want to be mentored a little bit more than they have been. And they also want to have broader skill sets become available to them to be able to develop. Because, just being at the bench, just being able to sort of conceptualize and carry out and analyze data, that's not necessarily going to be enough. And it's not necessarily going to be, I guess, like, as it's so competitive out there now, right? And STEM and all sorts of research can meander and find its way in almost any sector of society, right? So how can you build a skill set that is both rigorous and critical in how we think about science and the generation of knowledge, but also, like, you can manage projects, you can manage your timelines, you are able to engage in like heated discussions with effectiveness. You're making space for non-closure. Like, a lot of the things that make good leadership aren't necessarily taught in STEM or in research. And I think our scientists are saying, and from leadership to, beginner, they're saying, like, we want these skills to be involved in what science and science research looks like in the future. And so that's part of what we're trying to meet in this moment, is this eagerness to just like reimagine what scientific training can be, and then at the same time, help connect people to mentor the next generation.
Yeah, it's loaded, right? And I think the key word, and for those who are listening, this is actually the second time, Jeanne, you've been on the program. The first time was a couple of years ago. And in that presentation, you had one slide where you're talking about creating systemic change.
Yeah.
Right? And I remembered it very, very vividly. And so I wanted to bring it back to you and say, like, it sounds to me like as you mentioned, you have this theory of change and you're pushing for these systemic changes. What change is at the top of your list, at least all RockEDU's list, as you're doing the work?
All right. I'll focus on our newest initiative that we are entering into with Hunter College, which is a CUNY school just a few blocks from Rockefeller. And we've had these on and off informal relationships with Hunter College students for quite some time. Many of our scientists go and they might teach like a lecture or adjunct at Hunter or maybe TA there, right? But it's always sort of been something that people have been doing on their own. I'm very interested in ensuring that any kind of workforce development that takes place in the biotech sector of New York City is fueled by homegrown workforce. So it's important, given that CUNY schools, and because Hunter is just so close to Rockefeller, given the sort of the majority of New York City residents who attend those schools, I think it's a really good idea to partner with CUNY schools as much as possible to help whatever that looks like to get people ready to enter the biotech workforce. With all of these biotech incubators popping up, and there's a lot of investment at the city level to try to think about kickstarting the biotech sector of New York City so that it could be more akin to places like Boston or the Bay Area. And so as people are thinking about that from both, the logistical and economic and real estate kinds of points of view, I want to look at it from the education point of view with my colleagues, of course, in collaboration, because this is not a one-person gig, or can it be possible to be a one-person gig? But what we're trying to do is create, pathways where there's, clarity on how somebody who grows up in New York City can have economic mobility by pursuing a STEM education.
Yeah. And you mentioned this has kept coming up. Partnerships can't do this alone.
No way.
Right. And in New York, in New York, actually, there's a whole thriving ecosystem that I'm noticing. Right.
Yeah, it's amazing.
GenSpace, Micro, right, and of course the funders are there too. what is your philosophy around partnership development and working together to solve these really challenging problems?
So we have several consortia in New York City, and some of which I am a part of, some of which I am not a part of because, geez, there's only so much time in the day, right? But I'm in consortia with programs that align very strongly with the types of work and mission that we have at RockEDU. So, for example, there are a group of, I believe it's 33 sites across New York City, across the 5 boroughs. We are all funded by the Pinkerton Foundation. And what we do is we offer pre-internship training followed by mentored internships for New York City high school students from New York City public schools. And I mean, we get together on a quarterly basis, but we also collaborate. We do programs together. People from RockEDU are always for example, at GenSpace, teaching biohacker bootcamp, right? And so we're exchanging ideas, curriculum. We pinch hit for people when they're like, oh my God, something's happening. Can someone, and people have done that for us. Like, we have a lab space, and when our lab space is not available, we make it known that you can come and use our lab space and do your programs in our labs, right? And so it's a very sharing, it's a very, there's no competition. But the problem I think that I find is that, we are often serving different audiences or maybe have different approaches, and, always knowing how people are changing and evolving, it's hard to keep up. And so we're working on that, actually. And we're working on standardizing what it looks like to provide your information to people. And we're talking with each other. So what's the low lift? Because, everybody's stretched to the max. Right. And so if they're not running their programs, their grant writing, like, when are they going to have time to update a database? Right. So we're thinking about those problems and trying to figure out how to standardize that and just keep connected as best as we can.
Yeah. And this question is probably, when you ask a parent, who's your favorite kid, right? So I'll ask it in that line of light. And curious, for the program that you do run, is there a favorite one or two?
Okay. So I love our Jumpstart and SSRP because I get to work with amazing high school students who teach me not only current things that I just lost touch about, but they just teach me so much. They give me hope for the future. They talk about things that I think are so important, but I feel like I myself didn't even learn until I was 20 or 30 or something like that. Right. And in some ways I feel really positive about that, but in other ways I'm like, damn, these kids are growing up fast, right? They're in these worlds and they're growing up fast. So that's tough. And another program I really love doing is this festival that we run once a year called Science Saturday. And it's for kids in kindergarten through 8th grade and their families. That's our target demographic from anywhere in New York City. Again, it's a free program, and it's first come, first served because it's inside and we have we try to be cool. I learned my lesson with the fire department that I need to be cool. So, we try to keep to those kinds of parameters. But this is when we have about 200 scientists who volunteer their time and generate the most creative and just engaging kinds of demonstrations and experiments and hands-on activities. I mean, we have kids looking at flies that are walking on little tiny balls, rotating sort of ball bearings in 360 cameras and little electrodes connected to their brains. And the kids are using joysticks, and it's very cool. We're not doing your DNA out of strawberries, where we're doing optogenetics and fluorescent microscopy. And somehow it really lands with the young kids, and our scientists just love doing it. And it's such a beautiful day, and it's my favorite day at Rockefeller.
I'm curious. I asked you earlier about the scientists, so I want to go back to the other side of the equation. You kind of briefly touched on this, that the young people are teaching you a lot, right?
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
curious, what else are they telling you about their experiences in your programs?
Well, they're telling us a lot about their own funds of knowledge, right? Like how they understand the world, the viewpoints that they have, the experiences that shaped how they're approaching problems, or even thinking about how to interpret something that they're looking at. I really appreciate, how they are easily coming together, at least in the environment. I'm very proud of the environment that RockEDU team and all of the people that work with us, we've been able to really focus on making the space for diverse perspectives. And even when things maybe don't feel like they're going the right way, we know and we have the experience to help people get there. And it's just really cool to hear people think and watch people, the way people think. I just find that to be really beautiful and interesting and informative, and it helps to shape what we do in the future.
Yeah, and from what I've heard in other conversations, and I'm curious about this in New York, young people it's not like they just want to be exposed and engaged, but they also want to, they're aware of the problems in their communities, and
yes.
they're looking for ways, tools to tackle them. I wonder if you can expand and share your thoughts around that.
Yeah, well, I have to say, I love community-driven research perspectives, and I think the challenge is, well, geez, how do you get there, right? And so, I want to say that we are still trying to figure that out. However, we know that there are ways to introduce those kinds of thinkings into the conversation. For example, when we talk about we're doing a lot of molecular biology. It's just our bread and butter at Rockefeller, right? And so we'll talk about throwing things into plasma as an expression, but we'll also talk about things like genetically modified organisms and what that means to people and how that makes them feel. Or CRISPR gene editing. We use CRISPR routinely in the laboratory. It's just a really easy tool. And you think as you're moving little tiny bits of liquid from one tube into another that it's no big deal. But when you sort of pull out of that day-to-day protocol following and realize that people can use this technology on people, for curing diseases, and who knows, right? What does that mean? How does that make people feel? Who should be in charge of these kinds of questions? Whose problems? As Elizabeth Christopherson often says, whose problems are they? And are we listening to the people whose problems it actually is, right? And those are the kinds of conversations that we get to introduce into this, even if they're not able to necessarily dictate like a research project, because they're also there because they want to work with people on, fly behavioral rigs or, stem cell, proliferation. They want those things, right? So we can teach them that, but we want to make sure that they're inserting themselves and who they are and how they move through the spaces around us is vocalized, and they have that space to do so freely.
Jeannie, I wish we can just talk all day long.
It is really good. I'm sorry, I do talk a lot. I can go forever.
So I wonder, complete this sentence for me, and now we'll try as we get close to the end here. If you had X, and this is RockEDU,
sure,
right? The following would happen. Can you complete that sentence? So what are you missing in RockEDU? The X, and then what would happen if you got the X?
I mean, we want for very little at RockEDU, but I have to say, if I had a larger team, I could do a lot more work. That's basically it. It's people power.
Yeah, capacity, right? There's a limit to what you can do.
I feel like we know what to do in a lot of ways. We just don't have the physics for time travel, So
I like that, the physics.
Yeah, like truly, I feel like there's a lot of things I know we can do, but I have to end up prioritizing and just sort of like scraping the top off because we just run out of time and people. And I also want my team to have a good work-life balance. That's important, that they can always bring their whole selves to the work. And that means rest, right? And so I think that's a really important piece to incorporate into how we approach this work, especially because this work is very emotional.
Yeah. And I'm curious for New York, what gives you hope for the New York ecosystem in particular? Right? RockEDU is not an island, right? It's situated in the ecosystem. What gives you hope?
Just everyone is showing up. I mean, you ask for help and people arrive in droves. It's really special environment. I meet people all the time who love this kind of work and want to do more of this kind of work. It's very inspiring. And people have these amazing ideas that I would never have thought of. And, I love being able to say, oh, talk to this person. I think that you can make it happen together. And then something happens, it's very cool.
Yeah. And we didn't talk more about this, but tackling all these other issues as well, whether it's climate change, AI, because in a way you guys are activating, right? Both the scientists and those who are from the non-scientific communities, right, that are coming together. Yeah. It's really beautiful. What is a question that you are looking forward to address in the next year or two with RockEDU?
Yeah. Okay, so we are testing a mechanism to have, we're trying to create a non-leaky pipeline. So can we get undergraduate students who are not quite ready yet for internships yet, but how do we get them so that when they are ready, that they're competitive and they get the positions? So we're building curricula around that space. And that's the question I hope to answer is, can we scale in this way? And I hope we can.
We'll be right here waiting for those answers. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Why do stakeholders choose the CivicSciTV network?
Oh, that's a great question.
Yeah, great question.
That's a good one. That's a great question.
CivicSciTV. Top experts, great questions, new insights. Subscribe to the CivicSciTV network on YouTube and don't miss new insights from diverse stakeholders.